by my candle, as you can hear it crackling about, and my water cup, as you can hear it tinkling about. If you've read the title description of this video, this means I have, as you can even see, gotten 100 subscribers, so thank you to all 100 of you out there, not out you. And I guess the extra subscribers that have popped up ideally since I started filming this video. And here's to 100 more, 1,000 more, a million more. That may be a long stretch, but yeah, I just, welcome back if you have seen my previous videos, and welcome if you are brand new and maybe viewing this in the future. I kind of, want to do some more celebration videos like this. Ideally, 100 now, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, just keep going in that increments of, times 10 from the previous video. And I thought there was no better way to celebrate 100 subscribers than show you something very dear to me, and that is 100 years of Tarzan. Tarzan is not just that kind of okay Disney movie with a pretty good soundtrack, but it actually is a long-running series from the early 1900s written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And as much as it may show me as a nerd, I love Tarzan. Tarzan and the whole aesthetic of early century fantasy. I just think it's super cool. Back when people thought didn't actually think, hopefully, but fantasized about, different worlds being trapped in valleys in Africa, and dinosaurs still existing at the Earth's core, and mysterious islands, and all these crazy adventures people got into. I just think it's super fun and interesting, and I collect old books kind of like that. Whenever I find old bookstores, I try to find old science fiction, fantasy books from these eras. I just think they're super, fun and wacky and interesting, and I love them. And Tarzan is probably the cheapest thing I've collected out of all that. And this book came out in 2012 to mark 100 years since Tarzan had first been published, and it's just a sort of compilation of all the artwork and stories and just any other media thing that was pertinent to Tarzan. And I just thought, 100 subscribers, 100 years of Tarzan, why not celebrate them together? So let's crack this book open and take a look, shall we? Alright, so we are here with the centennial celebration of Tarzan. The stories, the movies, and the art. Very, very nice indeed. And if we check out our little intro here, to celebrate the Lord of the Jungle's 100th birthday and M. Bryce's 100th subscriber, internationally acclaimed Edgar Rice Burroughs expert Scott Tracy Griffin presents the ultimate review of a century of Tarzan. From the first publication of the smash bestseller Tarzan of the Apes, Burroughs' heroic ape man captured the hearts and imaginations of adults and children across the globe, whether by written word, moving image, comic strip, or radio broadcast. Tarzan remains one of the most recognizable pop culture icons in the world, with more than 100 million Edgar Rice Burroughs novels sold worldwide in 37 languages, including Braille and Esperanto, featuring an introduction from the great screen Tarzan, Ron Ely. Sure. And if you didn't know, this is the Return of Tarzan cover. There have been many Tarzan covers, editions of Tarzan covers for each series of Tarzan books written by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and every once in a while they'll come out with like new editions of them. So like, of course, first edition, mass market paperbacks, nicer paperbacks, anytime any new company takes them over. So I personally collect the white back editions, and I'll point out the white back paperback artworks as they come up. Alright, so here's that introduction by Ron Ely. I've never actually seen any of these older Tarzan movies, from like the 50s and 60s. I'd like to someday, but, I just don't watch a lot of movies anymore at all. I'm sure we're all more familiar with the Disney animated Tarzan. Here's Edgar Rice Burroughs. He kind of gives that lantern jaw H.P. Lovecraft look. And here's some early ERB, some early Edgar Rice, but we don't really care about Edgar Rice Burroughs, do we? We care about Tarzan. Dog alert. He had some other writings. You might be familiar with, John Carter of Mars. Ideally not through the horrific Disney movie John Carter, but maybe you've read it or have seen other depictions of it. It's kind of like if Tarzan is his fantasy series, then John Carter of Mars is his science fiction series. Of course, Tarzan was present in some pulpy magazines of the era. Sometimes novels back then would be serialized, and instead of like how you buy a full book nowadays, back then you would just buy like, say, magazines like the All Story or Argosy, and a chapter would be in one issue, the next week another chapter, the next week another chapter. So that would kind of stimulate you to keep buying these magazines. And then, of course, that's why the ending of all of these books will always have a cliffhanger. The ending of the chapter, because that would, galvanize you into say, oh, I gotta buy next week's issue and next week's issue so I can finish the story. So we have the first Tarzan here, published in 1912, Tarzan of the Apes. Here is the first edition right here with the low price of $1.30. And then here, I gotta say, probably my favorite artist, this would be Neil Adams, and they did the Ballantine Books covers for the 1975 series. These were the black paperback editions. This one specifically is the copy that my dad had, and the one that he, showed me and introduced Tarzan to me. So this is basically the art style that I always imagined Tarzan in, just because, that was my first introduction to him. So you got muscly as hell Tarzan bearing down on, these crazy looking apes. They're not like gorillas or monkeys or orangutans, they're just described as apes. And Edgar Rice Burroughs goes into great detail in the books to differentiate the apes that Tarzan is always interacting with from like any normal kind of monkey. That's Jane, by the way, in a very, very stylized, you could say, depiction of women back then. He's stylized as well. No man is that jacked and ripped, but, you kind of just gotta look at it for the times. Then we have, a more revamped version of the first cover. Then we have the two other main paperbacks we'll see. This one right here is the Richard Powers, 60s version cover arts. These are the ones my uncle has, and my uncle actually lent me a lot of his Tarzan copies before I got my own. And I still have two of them. I have number 13 at the Earth's Core and number 22, Tarzan in the Foreign Legion. And, I just haven't seen him forever, to the point where, okay, I want to give you these books back, but it has been literally 10 years since I've seen him. and just like probably another 20 since, or maybe 15, 20 since we borrowed the books initially, because I borrowed a bunch at a time. And it's just kind of like, okay, at what point are the books just like mine? At what point do they just belong to me because it's been so long? Like, does he even know that I have them? But that's the kind I've borrowed from him. And then this kind right here, this is the 1969 Valentine White covers by Roger Abbott. These are the kinds I have. So it's, whereas this one is like very muscly, very dark and shadowed, very much kind of that grunge fantasy like Conan the Barbarian. This one is more of like a not watercolor, but like you can kind of see the impressionist aesthetic in the back, and not everything is super detailed. And Tarzan's not as sexy, I don't think, but they're still good. What's interesting about this book is it'll have little added sections, and in between the descriptions of the actual book, they'll have little extra things like comic books and then little articles about, Tarzan's origin and whatnot. This book is like 300 pages though, so I'm not going to go into super detail on every single thing. It could be Tarzan or Tarzan, everyone pronounces it just a little bit different. Obviously it's Tarzan, but you can call it Tarzan. I won't get mad. Yes, the return of Tarzan. We have the cover from the front, the Neil Adams cover. We have, these were for comics, kind of, Technicolor, kind of little poppy. This was the sort of sequel to the first one where, believe it or not, Tarzan does not end up with Jane at the end of the first book. And the first book sort of ends on a cliffhanger because they didn't, obviously know it was going to be a success. And it did become super popular, and they're like, well, let's just keep making more of these. So this is the famous sequel where Tarzan finally marries Jane. They start a family, and they have more interactions with other tribes and groups of people in the famous lost city of Opar and the high priestess La of Opar. Tarzan's had many love stories besides just Jane, believe it or not, namely La of Opar and her savage ways. Part 3, The Beasts of Tarzan. Like the first 4 books all kind of follow the same villains in the same arc until Tarzan, kind of gets established as this lord in Africa. And this continues on after the return of Tarzan fighting this, this Russian duo of criminals. He commands a lot of friends. He gets a panther ally, some more monkey allies, ape allies, and it's just him doing his thing. The Mangini, that's, the name that he ascribes generally to his ape friends. So kind of like how in the movie, the animated Disney film, they call it Sabor, or they'll call Tantor, the elephant Tantor, the leopard Sabor. In the books, Tantor doesn't like a name. Tantor just means elephant in Tarzan's language. And Sabor isn't, the leopard's name doesn't actually even mean leopard. Sabor is a lioness. Numa means all lions. Sabor means all lionesses. Every little animal just has a name. As we would call an animal a name just in the language of the apes that Tarzan every once in a while will reference for us. Part 4 is the son of Tarzan, and that features Korak the Killer. This is sort of the starting point where not all of the Tarzan books are specifically about Tarzan. Matter of fact, later on he almost becomes a sort of guest character in other people's stories. This is the first kind of instance as only Tarzan's really in the first and the last chapter. Mostly it's about Korak the Killer and his sort of parallel adventures. Edgar Bryce Burroughs, was a pulp author. And as you'll see, if you read the books, there's a lot of repetition, a lot of copy and paste. Later on, a lot of the books just become Tarzan in the medieval era, or Tarzan in the Roman Empire, or Tarzan with dinosaurs. It kind of just, you can only do so much with a recycled plot or like a monster of the week kind of deal or a gimmick of the week. If it's a serially published novel in magazines, it's going to get, at some point, some repetition. Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar, one of the better Tarzan novels. That's not the first one. This is about Tarzan returning to the magical lost city of Opar, where the priestess La resides. What was interesting about this one is Tarzan gets hit by a stone and gets amnesia. So for a lot of the book, he's sort of returned back to his old, savage self. One of my favorite Tarzan covers, right here. He's marching down this hallway to the conflict there, and he has his knife angled up in the air. I think this is so cool because I just love the shot of it, and I think it's just so powerful. And then you have some of these covers. These are the Frank Frazetta covers, who was one of my favorite artists. I even have some Frank Frazetta prints on my wall over there. And do I love his Tarzan covers the best? No, I like the Neil Adams ones the best. But I still think Frank Frazetta is super cool, and it's just so interesting to see all these different artists' portrayals of Tarzan throughout the years. You have the really more modern ones by Boris Vallejo, who was in the 70s. Around the 80s and the 90s, they stopped reprinting them because the demand kind of just, sunk over the years. We got Tantor, his usual elephant friend. Jungle Tales of Tarzan. This one's not as good because this is just kind of short stories of Tarzan. And I mean, sure, they're fine, but I've just never been a short story guy. So we'll just skip past these guys. And we come on to some of my personal favorites. So this is book 7 and 8, Tarzan the Untamed, and then Tarzan the Terrible. This is a sort of parallel to the very first two books because the first two, Tarzan of the Apes and the Return of Tarzan, was kind of like a two-parter. So are these the only other really two-parter in the series, because in Tarzan the Untamed, Jane actually dies. Jane dies in the first chapter, and the book is about Tarzan, as you can see here, with his machine gun and his lion friend. He goes on a warpath throughout World War II Africa and murders men and joins different sides of the battles and basically becomes this ruthless killer because he loses his humanity after Jane dies. And because this was a serial, written across, multiple weeks and months, there was such a fan outcry over Jane dying that she comes back to life, and not in the last section, not in the last chapter, but on the literal last page. And it's just like, oh yeah, that body that you found with all of Jane's clothes and jewelry and whatnot on, that was just her servant who happened to be dressing up like her. Jane's still alive, go find her. And she's resurrected for the next book, Tarzan the Terrible, where she has been sort of kidnapped into this, one of the many lost valleys that Tarzan journeys to. This one particularly, you may notice some dated depictions of people where there's a bunch of white apes and black apes in this valley. There's kind of this racial conflict. And there's also triceratopses and other weird dinosaur things there. And Jane has been captured there, and it's Tarzan going to save her after he finds out she's alive. And the same villains carry over, the same side characters carry over. It's just Tarzan adventuring for the first time into this, dinosaur-ridden world. And it is kind of, here's even an article, Dinosaurs in Africa, about all the weird times Tarzan fights, very much of that era, the early 1900s, where people didn't know a lot about the world quite yet. It kind of just made up whatever. People just would write, oh yeah, there's a secret dinosaur valley that Tarzan's hanging out on. Alright, let me get some water here. Alright, so in the Tarzan, I guess, greater community, the first 8 books are considered, the best. Because it does kind of reach another natural conclusion after Tarzan the Terrible. The first 12 are good, because the next 4 are pretty okay. But then after that, the quality just kind of nosedives, because at that point it just becomes very copy and paste, and he kind of runs out of gimmicks to have. This is Tarzan and the Golden Lion. Basically, Tarzan teams up with a lion, and they go on adventures together. And they do cool stuff, like they fight together, Tarzan and his lion companion. Numa, friend and foe, as you can see here. Numa is the name that all lions have in the Tarzan universe. Tarzan the Ant-Man, this is kind of like, Gulliver's Travels, where Tarzan finds a bunch of ant-sized men, and they're all in wars with other ant-sized men, tribes, and he kind of just gets thrown into the mix with all of them. Tarzan speaks all these languages because what people don't really stress in the Disney movie is Tarzan's actually a genius. So Tarzan knows French, English, Arabic, German, Dutch, Waziri, the mongrel tongue of Africa's west coast, the tribal dialect of the natives of the German forces, Bagego, the language of the Shiftas, Bensuto, Utengan, Bukena, Buriru, Swahili, Buntango, Babango cannibal tongues, the Pithecanthropy of Paludan, a slightly more sophisticated variant of Mangini, the sign language of the Alali, Minuian, Sagoth, Pellucidarian, Ethnian and Cathlian, Zulu dialect Kaji, the Altamid, Alam Danjan's mixture of Portuguese and Bantu, Mayan, Latin, and African drum dialects. One of the things that always appealed to me about Tarzan was he's a master of physical prowess, but also of mental capability, because it stresses many times how quick he is to learn things and how much his brain capacity has for storing information and just being a cool guy. We have Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle here, book number 11, and that was when Tarzan goes to the medieval ages. Another instance of a lost valley. And as you can see here, Tarzan is, jousting with knights. He meets King Arthur in this one, and he's like Sir Lancelot and all the other knights, and he gets kind of embroiled in this medieval plot, swords and sorcery kind of thing, and it's just, a good old time. Tarzan and the Lost Empire. This is Tarzan fighting the Roman Empire, the Roman Legion, and he's in gladiatorial matches, and he's, fighting in the army and all this just kooky stuff. This is really when Tarzan started to pop off, and just ridiculous stuff would happen. Alright, book 13, a book that I don't own technically myself, but I have my uncle's copy. This is Tarzan at the Earth's Core, when Tarzan journeyed to the land of Pellucidar, which Edgar Rice Burroughs would revisit in another series, but this was when he, as you can tell, fought dinosaurs. So he's fighting pterodactyls, he's fighting Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's just Tarzan and all the weird early 1900s fantasy fan fiction you could have. Fighting giant bear creatures, other sort of species of apes. It's just him going nuts. Saber-toothed tigers is just, a little lost valley that you can navigate through the Earth's core and the internal sun under the Earth's crust and all that just absolutely wild stuff, I hope to one day kind of write something similar to this, a sort of grunge fantasy, early century fantasy mixture. I just think it'd be so cool. So this is Tarzan the Invincible, the edition I actually just picked up in a used bookstore in Denver. So this was the white back cover that I have. And this one I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to. He returns to Opar and visits La once again. I think there's like 4 or 5 books that involve Opar and La. And I think she's one of the more endearing characters throughout the series. Yeah, we even have a section of Opar here. It's kind of like their standard, lost civilization, very much sort of Mayan, Aztec, Incan vibes to it. We have Tarzan triumphant. This is sort of where a lot of the plots just kind of become Tarzan fights X group of people. And even there's some books where they're not even as pulpy in the sense of, I'm just going to fight medieval people or fight Roman people. It's just like, we're just going to fight a different group of natives or, a different section of Africa. And, it kind of becomes okay. Yeah, the lost race tales, just Tarzan fighting any kind of random group of people. Tarzan in the City of Gold. Yeah, just more Tarzan, more femme fatales, more, savage groups of people. And, nowadays, if you wrote stuff like this, you'd probably be misconstrued as a racist. I don't think, Edgar Rice Burroughs was progressive by any means, but you gotta realize that, these were made 100 years ago. So you have, femme fatales, and you have all these different depictions of women back then, as being these, sexy, seductive people who are trying to, conquer the savage beast man of Tarzan. And that's just how it was back then. You probably wouldn't want to make anything like that today. And you kind of have to realize that it was like that just equally for the men. I mean, no regular man can fight, 5 freaking gorillas at once. Tarzan and the Lion Man. I think it's about him fighting a similar sort of creature to him. Like no man has a 12 pack, and can fight giant beasts with just, their bare hands and his famous father's knife he's always carried with him. It's just an element of escapism, I think, that you have to come to terms with. This is not meant to reflect reality. It's just about having fun and writing something goofy and just, enjoying yourself while you read a book. Tarzan's many appearances here, whether he has short hair, long hair, whether he's whiter or more tanned. I think my Tarzan, how I pictures, probably most akin to that. Or that, I'm more about the long hair Tarzan, because of course, my first experience ever with him was like the Disney Tarzan movie. Tarzan and the Leopard Men here. But, however you view him, as long as he's a big, muscly, loincloth-clad man, you're probably about right. But I mean, look at this thing. Isn't that just crazy? Tarzan fighting dudes with literal leopard hard skin and claws and all that crazy stuff right on them. Yeah, one day I hope to collect all of the white back covers, so I just like to, make a quick check of any local bookstore I come across. This one is Tarzan's Quest. By now, there's actually a sort of fan theory that Tarzan is immortal because he lives, the first book was in 1912, and that kind of took place in the late 1800s a bit even, and he fights in World War I and he fights in World War II, and he's kind of ever present even as like people around him get old and die. Oh, conveniently, yeah, Tarzan is immortal because there's just been some theories that he was affected by this one thing and maybe this other thing, and he kind of just, lives forever. Is it maybe just plot armor for him to have? Yeah, probably. But hey, that's okay. Tarzan in the Forbidden City. A lot of forbidden things, a lot of cities, a lot of, repetition, as you can see by now. This is kind of when Tarzan faded into the, the copy and paste section. There's only so much you can do. The paperback revolution, making it easier for people to buy. These are the white backs that I have. Tarzan says the title, and then the little, I guess that kind of impressionist, more like colored pencil, crayon looking, I'm not an artist, kind of drawing. I'd like to be an artist, to work on painting and stuff, but I have so many projects right now, I guess I don't have time yet, but someday. Tarzan the Magnificent. Yes, he is invincible, magnificent, triumphant, terrible, untamed. Tarzan is everything. Tarzan in the Eyes of Grey. That's just a thing that I guess Edgar Rice Burroughs likes. He always mentions that people have gray eyes, and this is just all the times he mentions people having gray eyes. I guess it's just, as it says here, a prerequisite of heroism. Because he did write, Edgar Rice Burroughs not only wrote Tarzan, but he wrote those John Carter of Mars series with, sort of sci-fi. He wrote these Western novels, and he has a bunch of random one-offs, like Cave Girl or The Monster Men. Little one-offs that I even have, too. This is Tarzan and the Foreign Legion. This is the Australian, when he's in Australia. It's my uncle's favorite Tarzan book. He's fighting an orangutan here. He fights a shark. Just fights crazy Australian stuff while meeting, other groups of people. This is kind of when, all these past books have been, it'll focus on someone else, and Tarzan will kind of be like this character in the background. I kind of think, Pirates of the Caribbean, where, okay, Jack Sparrow is like, obviously Johnny Depp, and sort of the face of the franchise, but really it's about Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley, right? Jack Sparrow is kind of just this guy who appears in this scene and that scene, and, he's just kind of this overarching presence. That's kind of how Tarzan becomes, which to me is why some of the later books lose their charm, because they always are just about these kind of random, bland heroes, and Tarzan is just kind of on the sidelines. Here we have Tarzan and the Madman, about a Tarzan impersonator, Tarzan versus Tarzan. Tarzan and the Castaways, the final book of the Edgar Rice Burroughs Tarzan series that he made. There have been some posthumous or, other people trying to take the mantle of writing Tarzan, but of course they're not as good. Now we get into the kind of extraneous section of other things for Tarzan that came out. These are like the kids, Tarzan for kids. They kind of dumbed it down books for boys and girls. And there were ones that were specifically made for kids. Because whether you know or not, the actual Tarzan books, like the original books, are extremely violent. Tarzan's getting pieces of his flesh ripped off, and he's like ripping monsters and creatures' necks out and beating them to death. It's actually, a pretty bloody and gory book, believe it or not. Here's a really interesting section, How to Speak Ape. These are some of the words that appear throughout the series that are in the ape language. I'm a huge nerd, and I could probably name some of them without even looking them up. But if you just quick look in here, you'll see Cheetah means panther, leopard. Ska is vulture. Numa is lion. Clue is hen. Ao is much. Wausha is leaf. Ta is high. Tanda is dark. Just some random words that, the apes would speak in a sort of broken language. This is kind of cool. This is Tarzan's Africa. I can't really show it all the way without destroying my camera stand, my tripod. But it, shows all the little random valleys and lost, civilizations that Tarzan finds throughout his journeys. And of course, some Edgar Rice's Burroughs personal notes that showed all of his initial plans. Tarzan and the funny pages, some of the Tarzan comics that came out of that era. Actually, I think this is all of the Tarzan comics, if I remember correctly. There weren't a lot of them. They'd kind of just show up, here and there. They actually were by Edgar Rice Burroughs, so I think he just, kind of wrote them here and there as people would demand. Yeah, I was never much of a comic book guy, just in general, to be honest, but I wouldn't pass up some Tarzan comics if I got my hands on them. Some of the other random words. It's interesting to see all the different interpretations and styles from the years and how he's changed, but at the same time remained the same for, all these many decades, for over 100 years. Tarzan of the radio. Of course, he was of that era, so they had radio programs and shows back when the radio was, important. I guess it's still important now, it's just not as relevant. But I guess, if he was so popular today, they'd probably have a Tarzan podcast or, something like that. Some of the early silent films Tarzan was involved in. They used to make a lot of Tarzan movies. It was very popular. And now it's kind of just a cheesy, leopard skin pelt that, they had back then. Probably cheesy, by today's standards, but back then they were huge, I'm sure. In the MGM era. Kind of makes me wonder, because nudity was kind of a big thing to avoid back then, how, basically naked men and women on Tarzan movies were treated like, oh, it's okay if it's, if it's for a Tarzan movie, you know what I mean? weird, publicist stuff with, here's Tarzan with a loincloth golfing in the field. The Soul Western era. Yeah, they just crank these things out. It's funny because, nowadays people will look at, the Marvel movies and be like, yeah, they release way too much and their quality goes down and they're just, the market's oversaturated. Well, they did that with, they've always done that. How many Tarzan movies were there? How many of any other series back then were there? You'd have a new Tarzan movie out every year. They've always been doing that. Sort of, copy paste, same actors, same plots, just, it's not I will grant Marvel this as much as I dislike their movies. It's not like a just them problem. It's just a human production problem. One of those things that Tarzan will always look better in book form than in movie form. Remember that cool Tarzan and the Leopard Men cover of the leopard guys and the armor and the claws, and now it's just a guy with a crappy outfit and what looks to be just forks for his claws. It just looks cheesy as hell. Tarzan, the Psy, Weintraub era. Yeah, they just did not stop making these. And of course, this is back before people would just roid rage out to get movie roles, so it's just a regular looking guy, and then just something that looks kind of cheesy about it, because it's you can never truly replicate the absolute, the beast-like monstrosity of how he's depicted in the drawings. No real man looks like that. And then you kind of just get oh yeah, that's Tarzan, just this Hollywood actor. Got some more contemporary ones. I've actually seen this Tarzan, but not as good. Walt Disney's Tarzan, yeah, the one we all probably know. They had the movie of this, and I don't know if any of you are young enough to remember, but Disney Channel actually had a little Tarzan TV show that kind of explored, more stuff that happens in the books, going to the dinosaur area or, stuff like that, which I'm sure they capitalized on for kids, because what kid doesn't want to see Tarzan fight dinosaurs? Don't worry about that train. It's definitely nothing. I live right next to a train track. But hey, how many of you are still with us? Have you turned off the video? I want to do a quick test because I've been playing around with my YouTube analytics, whatever. So if you can hear this message, and if you can, if you've been with me long enough, 40 minutes at this point, to hear my unedited train noise, please leave me a comment down below and tell me I'm a lazy sack of shit for not, editing that out. Because I don't know how many of you actually get to this point. It'd be kind of interesting to, see who can comment, first, or, how many and whatnot. So yeah, drop me a line. This is kind of a lot of the weird business dealings of it. Here's, a little Edgar Rice Burroughs plate with, Tarzan, and then the John Carter of Mars planets, and then the famous doodad, which is his personal little signature. We got some Tarzan collectibles, whether it's clothing, a skateboard, a lunchbox, just a lot of random stuff. We have the sequels that other authors wrote Tarzan novels, which, as I'm sure you can just tell from the covers, look very 2000s-y, very random. Just oh, okay. If R.A. Salvatore can do a Tarzan book, evidently anyone can. And just more about, you got, Russian Tarzan over here, it looks like. Spanish Tarzan. Just all the languages and cultures that Tarzan is available. The conventions, if you really, really like Tarzan. Tarzan for the internet. Other just worlds that they've explored with. Usually his other series, it looks like. I'll just skip past these guys. More stuff about Edgar Rice Burroughs and his life. Which, I mean, once again, we don't care about Edgar Rice Burroughs, we care about Tarzan. Here's all the stuff that he wrote. The Tarzan books, the John Carter of Mars books, Pellucidar books, some stuff about Venus, kind of in his Mars series, other things about that, some of his, what are they called, Western books, and then a lot of the random one-offs he did, then all the Tarzan movies that have ever been made, and then all the television series, radio programs, Broadway shows, comic books. And for further reading, if you like Tarzan, you might like these other books and whatnot. This is the last picture we have for Tarzan Triumphant from Frank Frazetta. And that's it for us. So, thank you for joining me for my 100 subscriber and 100 years of Tarzan celebration. I'm about to run out of time, so I'll quickly escort us out. But I really am so appreciative of everyone who's been watching with us so far. As always, I am M. Price, and this is M. Price Can Read. And as you do know as well, Dog City never sleeps. I hope that you may sleep